Well, here we are again for another program for the Monroe County History Club. My name is Michael Carter, and I'd like to welcome everybody here again. I've been told by the Legion to make an announcement. They don't want people bringing food in like from McDonald's or Wendy's or George's hot dogs or whatever. Anyway, it's because, you know, they sell food here, so I've been asked to make that announcement. No problem this time, but in the future, you know, if they can kind of not do that. Got to say hello to my wife, Paulette, who's here. There she is. Hello. And my brother, my cousins over there. So we've been doing this every month for the past 11 and a half years now, or so, in the quest for presenting and hopefully preserving local history. We're helped in that endeavor by our friends at the American Legion Post. There's literally no other venue that would work for what we do. So thanks to the management here, and thanks to the servers in the kitchen. Yeah, be generous to the servers. They work hard. And please be patient. You know, it's a large group, so it takes them a little while to get around everybody. And thanks to Cats TV and our guy Dave back there, who's been recording our programs for quite a while now, 9 years. This allows people from places far and wide to view these programs, and they are very grateful for the opportunity to experience presentations about their old hometown. I'm able to upload these programs to YouTube a few days after each program, and it's amazing how many views we get. One of them has 6,500 views so far. It was the one on Monroe Lake we did earlier this year, and we've had a lot of them, or several of them are over 2,000 views. So there's a lot of people looking at these, and that's great. Also, I'm proud of the relationship we have with the Monroe County History Center. I'm on the board there. They've supported us every inch of the way, and we try to help them in any way possible. Thanks also to IU Photo Archives and the Monroe County Public Library for all their support. As for the YouTube videos, they're easy to find. Just go to the YouTube link and just put Monroe County History Club in the search link, and all our programs come right up. There are over 100 of them now. It's amazing number of programs, ranging on the subjects like history of RCA, history of Showers Brothers Furniture, history of Lake Monroe, local quarries, stone mills, Monon Railroad, and a lot more. The local schools. How many new attendees do we have? Any new ones? Well, don't see any, but if anybody wants to leave their email address for me to give to our buddy George, who sends them out every month, you can leave me your email address, and I'll see that he gets it. Right now, Daniel Schlegel, the director of the Monroe County History Center, would like to make a few statements.
All right, thank you, Michael. I just had a couple things really quick for everybody. One, this coming Friday and Saturday, we have our November garage sale. This is the 4th year we're doing it. So if you are a Cook employee or you're a History Center member, you get in on Friday a day early, and then the public is invited out on Saturday. Both times start at 9 a.m., so come see me. I have a bunch of flyers, so you can take one home. If you've not been to the garage sale, it is huge. It's almost 1 acre under a roof, so there is about everything under the sun there. And we rely a lot on the community to bring in donations when people change out furniture, they downsize, whatever the case may be. They just don't want something. So feel free to come see me in case you'll have donations in the new year. If you're interested, we would be happy to talk to you about that. And then on Saturday as well, we also have a local author book fair that's coming up at the History Center. There's going to be 30 different authors that are all here in Monroe County that have written all kinds of books, from sci-fi for anyone that likes that, to children's books. So feel free to drop by on Saturday at the History Center downtown, because like I said, there'll be 30 local authors, so maybe some of your friends and neighbors will be there. And then the final thing is we are having a senior chords show and tell. Has anyone been out to see our senior chords exhibits? Yeah, good. Honestly, I thought I recognized a few faces. And Michael can vouch for it. I like this guy and trust him. It is an excellent exhibit that we have up. And so almost every event we've had, people have either worn their senior cords in or brought them in. And so that's part of the reason why we decided to put together this show and tell. So Gabby, our assistant curator, handed a lot of these little flyers out. I did wind up with 1 or 2 extra, so if you need one, please come see me while I have 1 or 2 left. And that's coming up on Saturday, November 16th. It's just drop-in from 1 to 3 p.m. at the History Center. So everyone is welcome to come see more senior cords. If you didn't get your fill in the exhibit, or if you want to come see the exhibit and see more, come in on that drop-in day on November 16th. Otherwise, I brought all kinds of books. I'm very excited for Glenda's talk here. Her presentations are always so wonderful. So I brought all kinds of books that relate to Monroe County, and I'll be over here to the right. So enjoy, everybody.
Thanks, Daniel. Speaking of flyers, I left some on each table, just a list of our coming programs for the next year. Only one per table because I'm not going to print off 100 of them. So you can share or fight over them, whatever is best. Yeah, like for instance, next program, November 26th, we're going to do a program on Smithville. Should be another big one. It's called Smithville Indians, Pioneers, Ski-Bows, and Lake Monroe. Rosie Gersman will introduce you to family names and individuals that help the area of Monroe County flourish and to introduce education and sports. And now December, we're taking the month off. They're just too busy here with other things. And the usual time for our program would be December 24th, which is a no-no, and December 31st. So we're going to take that month off and then back to the normal things. That brings us to today. We're having Glenda Murray. She gave this program at the History Center about a year ago, wasn't it? I think so. And I saw that and I thought, wow, this is perfect. Hopefully she can do that for us, and she's consented to do that. It's called A Brief History of Bloomington and Monroe County, and it's going to cover about 200 years of history in a short time. So time's running out, so we better let her talk about it.
Came to be formal, but I don't think I'll wear that jacket, sorry. Thank you all for having me, and with that build-up, I'm a little nervous now, but here we go. I wanted to thank the History Club, the History Center, and the Public Library because many of these slides have come from one of those other 2 places. And thank the staffs who helped me everywhere I go. A county historian is appointed by the Indiana Historical Society, and I've had the honor of being the Monroe County historian for the last 6 years. So with the recommendation of the local history center. So I just wanted to explain, sometimes say, how did you get to be the county historian? My high school teacher taught us by outline. Now, this was a long time ago, and we were expected to take notes from these outlines, the old mimeograph outline. Let me just say that most of the kids in my class did not find that very exciting or interesting at all. But what I got out of it was the value of the chronology of trying to understand how things fit in order. And so I still like to use chronologies a lot so that we can see how things go together. This is a short history. I obviously can't cover that much or you'd be here all day and night. But I am going to try to touch on business, industry, government, somewhat in chronological order. And because I'm the county historian, one major job that they tell us we need to do is to go see every county, every state marker that's in our county and take a picture of it every year and send it back to them so that they know that it's in good condition or it's not. So I've included all of them in case you've missed 1 or 2. We have 11 of them right now. But my question to you is, so what else should we be considering to nominate for a state marker? Prior to the arrival of white settlers, the Miami, the Delaware, the Potawatomi, and the Shawnee people lived and hunted in this area. So I wanted to acknowledge them before we march on into territorial and state and county history. Indiana became a territory in 1800, became a state in 1816, and then in 1818, we have the creation of the city and the county. And years ago, I was on a board with Judy O'Bannon when before her husband was governor, and she kept saying, we have to plan for these things. We have to plan for 2016, 2018, 2020. And you know, those years just all came and went. And we did a good job planning and celebrating all of them. The IU got a little short shrift in 2020 when they didn't get to do everything because of COVID. The Indian claims were terminated by the two treaties, the Harrison Purchase in 1809 and the Treaty of St. Mary's in 1818. And then it came time to create Bloomington and Monroe County. We were part of Orange County, and many of our settlers came from the upland South, which is the Carolinas, Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. So we started with 12 townships. Marion was absorbed into Benton in 1951. Let's see if I can, there, into there. So Benton is twice as big as the other townships, and that's why. And I just like to show this plat map because I think it's such a nice map. And it shows you how big the original plat of the city was. Patrick and I live, whoops. Let's see what I can do here. Let's go back. There. Point at the right thing, sorry. We live right there on the corner of the original plat, not in the original plat. The first courthouse was a log cabin where the Waldron Center is now at 4th and Walnut. And they started immediately to have a subscription school in part of this. So they valued education for those who could pay for it and pay for the subscription school because that helped pay for the teacher. But education was of interest from the beginning. The second courthouse was built in what is now the Courthouse Square and expanded in 1856 and 57 and again in 1875. And so you can see the wings in the lower picture that were added. And then this one was demolished in 1906 for the new courthouse. We jump over to creating the university, the first campus at Seminary Square, created in 1820. They used the sale of lots from Seminary Township, which is now Perry Township, and to support the school, which opened in 1825 with 1 instructor and 12 male students. The school taught ancient Greek and Latin when they started. They became Indiana College in 1828, to teach useful arts and sciences, and then IU in 1838 with an even expanded range of what they were going to teach. By 1860, they had about 100 male students. I'm sure you've all seen pictures of Andrew Wiley, the first president from 1829 to 51, and he would have been there longer than that, except he died from an infection. I hope you've had the chance to visit the Wiley House Museum, which was his home and then home to another part of the family for most of those, for many, many years. And it's now a museum under the IU library system. Seminary Square, they began to build buildings here. There was a fire in 1854 that destroyed the main building, but they rebuilt. And then the marker, I told you we'd talk about the state historic markers. This one was dedicated in 2009. The challenge with a marker is finding a spot where it will be visible and where people can get to it. And to get to this one, you have to park at Kroger's and walk across College Avenue to get closer to the marker. So that's one of the challenges, is figuring out where to put them. I also wanted to talk about the female seminary, which was started in 1833 and ran for 30 years. Educated many women who became teachers, including Margaret Hemphill McCullough, for whom McCullough School was named. She's buried in Rose Hill. She was the first female superintendent of a school, and that was in Bloomington. And this building was where the old Masonic Temple is now. But it was there, and they taught lots and lots of women. As the town began to grow, we got a railroad, which was a really big deal because when the New Albany and Salem Railroad opened in 1853-54, it later became the Monon, and it made traveling to IU easier. One of the problems with having a state seminary or a state university here is that you couldn't get here from very many places. So this really helped, and it also made transporting things easier and more economical, especially heavy things like limestone and eventually logs and furniture. The Monon route led to the growth of Bloomington, Harrodsburg, Ellettsville. Mount Tabor and Stanford were bypassed and declined. New communities, on the other hand, grew up along the route: Smithville, Clear Creek, Steinsville. In 1850, we had about a little over 11,000 people in the whole county. 78, not quite 80 students, and 60 residents in Ellettsville. And we were mostly an agricultural population. As we move into the 1850s and toward the Civil War, I wanted to talk briefly about the Underground Railroad. Indiana was a northern state, but many of the residents, as I already mentioned, came from the Southland and had relatives still there. So there were both African American and white people who helped enslaved people escape. Can you hear me when I get too far from this? Sorry. On the Underground Railroad. One of those houses that we are quite sure was a stop on the Underground Railroad was the James Ferris House, and there are a number of others in Bloomington. But this is really hard to document, in part because after 1850, it was illegal to help a slave escape, so you didn't really even write in your diary about it very much, or write to the neighbor, or write to your family someplace else. So I'm still convinced that somebody's attic has information that will help us be able to find more official documentation. So check your attic or your neighbor's. There's a new marker at Switchyard Park on the African American Heritage Trail, which Elizabeth Mitchell has started this new set of markers to help us understand better about the Black history in Bloomington and Monroe County, which was not very well documented over the many years. But we know that there were people, Black people, who were involved in the Underground Railroad as well. One they call anti-Myrers, but they have almost no documentation. We don't even know what her first name was. It was Auntie. So lots of research still to be done. In the Civil War, got carried away there. In the Civil War, we sent soldiers. Some of the local industries made things for the Civil War. I wanted to mention David Van Buskirk, who was reputed to be the tallest man in the Union Army. He was 6'8". He survived and came home and was elected to county office here in Monroe County and is buried up in the northwest corner. And folks have talked about him before. After the war, Sarah Park Morrison became the first female student at IU. And that was in 1867. 6 years later, she was the first female instructor at IU. In 1883, there was a fire that destroyed the library of the university, 13,000 volumes, which in those days was a lot of books, and David Dale Owen's collection of rocks and fossils, which they value at about 85,000 specimens. And the zoological cabinet. Those things, the cabinet is said to have contained the largest private collection of fish in the world, fish stuffed. But it was the foundation of all of the IU collections, and it was all gone. So the trustees looked around and said, we're landlocked here. Let's just move. So they moved to Moses Dunn's farm on the far east side of town. And that is the edge of campus now, of course. IU built Wiley and Owen out of brick. Monroe County paid $50,000, and the insurance paid $20,000 to build those first buildings. At the same time, the Showers brothers bought their dad out and had built a business at around 9th and Grant Street. Fire destroyed that business in 1884. So the city helped them rebuild at 10th and Morton by contribute about half the cost of the new construction. And I would note that the Ellettsville Business District was also destroyed by fire in 1886. So, as I've just explained, there were major fires in those few years that really could have caused us all to just fall apart. But instead, the city and the county jumped in and helped those businesses grow, which made the community grow. The social consequences of these changes was that many people who used to live at around 9th and Grant, where the old Showers was, moved west of downtown, where the new Showers was. And that was especially true for the African American families. The area between downtown and the new campus became upscale residential, and the Showers family, as you know, built their houses along Washington Street. And here's the new sawtoothed buildings that we know so well. The third major growth after the Civil War was the limestone industry. John Matthews came from England in the 1860s and started using newer technology besides just the backs of the employees. In 1875, John Hoadley bought the county's first channeling machine, and that's one of the pictures here. By the late 1800s, companies were quarrying in the southern and the western parts of the county, and the railroads had helped make that feasible. Limestone channeling. And I always like to show and remind ourselves that not only did we provide the limestone, but our very skilled carvers provided the carvings for buildings all over the country and, in fact, the world, but especially the country. Patrick and I were in the National Cathedral a few years ago, and somebody was saying something about the building materials, and we said, oh, we know where that came from. And I wanted to mention a little bit about Steinsville and their historic marker, the birthplace of the limestone industry and the home of the quarry lads. Steinsville was one of the first signs to the state historic markers to be erected in our county. It really needs repainting, so if anybody is interested or knows someone who might be, the state historic marker program and I would like to talk to you, please. This is the one that I consider my failure. There was a bridge, the ferry bridge was built over the White River, the West Fork of the White River, in 1903. It's one of the longest railroad bridges, or highway bridges, of its type. It closed in 1990 after the new bridge, which I think, if I remember right, is named for Phil Rogers. But we had this state historic marker here in 1996. And when Patrick and I went out to look at it last year, because I'm supposed to go every year, and I had skipped the year before, I confess, it wasn't there. It's gone. So the state and I are talking about how we can do something about that. And it had been vandalized, as you can see. So that's a sad story for the state historic markers. But we have lots of others that are very good. Another change that came after the Civil War was the state legislature decided it was time to require public education for the children. The townships developed a number of schools. This is over 90 in our county alone, for one and two room schools. Eventually, by 1875, Central School was built about where the convention center is now on College, at 3rd and College. And the old school, which is where the History Center is now, was made into a school for black children. It's called the Center School. And that historic marker was erected in 2005, and it's in front of the History Center. The city was expanding, and even that new Central School that they started wasn't big enough. So they built a new one at Fairview on the west side in 1892-93. And it was there for a long time before it was replaced multiple times. The old, what is called the colored school, was torn down in the 19-teens to build a Carnegie Library at 6th and Washington. And Banneker School was built on the west side for the black students in town. Grade school only. If all the kids who went to high school went to school together, but we did have segregated grade schools. And there is the report in 1915 that the African American students who had been housed at the Armory at 3rd and College, which is again very close to where the other city school was, the Central School, the students had been there. When Banneker was finally completed in December of 1915, the Bloomington Evening World said, "The colored students marched from the old Armory to their new school on December 7th. So they finally had their own school, which we call Banneker now. And there's its marker as well. And the school building is still used. It's used by the Parks and Rec now. And I threw this in because I like thinking about, okay, we've had school buses for 90 years now. And they're a little different than what we have now, but you can still you look at it and you say, oh yeah, that's a school bus. And I was going to read you all these numbers, and I thought that's silly, so I'm putting them up there for you to look at. There were almost 21,000 residents at the beginning of the Civil War, 6,500 of them in Bloomington. A little over 400 were black residents. A little over 600 were IU students. And Ellettsville, by that time, had grown to over 700. So you could see that the town, the city and the town and the county were all growing. There were lots of business and industry at this time, but only a couple major ones, which we've already talked about. But there was the Home Glove Mitten Company, which made canvas and cloth work gloves. The Basket Factory, which made wooden fruit baskets. How many of you have wooden fruit baskets in the somewhere? And Nuri Glass, which made glass and mirrors for showers and other things. And one of the things they did, if you remember, were the old cigarette machines had the mirrors on them. Some of those came from Nuri Glass. And they made glass backboards for basketball. At the turn of the century, there were about 38 new quarries and 25 stone mills, in addition to the ones that were already here. It was a booming industry. But it was not all work. There were also fun things, and the Gentry Brothers Dog and Pony Show and then circus were one of those. And so here is a wonderful picture of Circus Day in 1916, marching down the street. And I love the one young lady's hat, where she's sitting right there. Good things and bad things in town. The local council of women started in Bloomington in the late 1800s as a group of the local women's organizations. And together they decided in 1904, after the young man died in a train accident, he had fallen asleep on the tracks, and he died. They decided it was time that there be a hospital in this town, and the men hadn't done it yet, so they started raising money. They got a lot of help from men as well. They picked a spot, they bought the Hopewell House, this 10-room red brick house, which was northwest of where the current core building is at First and Rogers Street. So this was the first hospital, 10 rooms. And not only did we now have a north-south road, but in 1906, we got an east-west road, what became the Illinois Central Railroad. Time to build the new courthouse in 1908, and the historic marker for that one dates from 2001. It's built, of course, of locally quarried stone. And the weather vane came from the 1826 courthouse and was done by Austin Seward. At the turn of the century, some roads were improved enough that we began to receive rural free delivery, RFD, but the government would only offer that if the roads were passable most of the time, almost all the time. So a certain amount of road work was required. Agriculture was still one of the major means of livelihoods, so there were new programs from the state, from the land-grant colleges like Purdue. There was the County Extension Program, the Indiana Extension Homemakers Association, and 4-H, all of which started around 1910. And I don't know about you, but many of the people I knew were in 4-H or County Extension or are still in those programs. We also began to get electricity. Bloomington got 29 streetlights in 1879. And IU electrified in 1895. And the city developed a sewer system and paved over 70 blocks of streets and sidewalks. And that sounds like a lot till you start counting, and then 70's not really very many. Ellettsville began installing lights in 1916 and a water system in 1927. So we were trying to be up to date. In 1910, the U.S. Census Bureau listed us as the U.S. center of population. And if you go up to the courthouse lawn, there is the big round stone that was at Showers and is now on the courthouse lawn as the center of population in 1910. There were lots of changes over time, and black students were admitted to IU early on, but they weren't allowed to live on campus, they weren't allowed to eat in most of the downtown establishments, etc. So in 1911, some black male students began what was a fraternity. And they changed their name in 1915 to Kappa Alpha Psi. They built the building that is now the IU Police Station up on 17th Street, and they sold it to the foundation in 2008, the IU Foundation. They are considered the only Greek fraternity or sorority that has its Alpha chapter or its first chapter at IU Bloomington. And so they got a marker. World War II brought a number of changes at IU around the community and the training of young men. And then I put the top one in because they used part of what was then the assembly hall to as beds for so many people who were sick with the influenza in 1918, 1919. By this time, the hospital had realized they needed to expand from their 10 rooms, and they built this building in 1918. And I know there are people, I'm sure there are people here who were born here or in the core building, so. And there is still time for fun. Things that were new in the early 20th century were the Princess Theater in 1913, the Indiana Theater in 1922. There are always problems with a community, and in our community, we've never, until recently, had an adequate water supply. So think, when was the last time you ever saw that many people gathered in a meeting, except for when we won a championship of some sort? This was a protest meeting. The city had developed land, some lakes on the southwest side, but they were all in karst topography, which, as you know, means that they leaked because it's porous limestone. They developed Twin Lakes in the 1890s, Leonard Springs in 1915, and by the 1920s, we still didn't have enough water for the number of people who were here. The city wanted to expand at Leonard Springs. The Chamber of Commerce and the newspaper said, no, we need a lake on the northeastern side of town. There was a story of a government official who said, I don't believe Twin Lakes leaks. I walked all the way across it and I didn't see any leaks. It was a fight, let me put it that way. And at one point, both IU and Showers threatened to move out of town if the city didn't do something more to get better water. So at the same time, the water plant sometimes would shut down for 3 times in a week. And the city people often hired county people to haul water to their cisterns in town so that they would have an adequate water supply. When we bought our house, as I said, on the very edge of what had been the original plat, we had 2 cisterns, one on the back porch and one in the front yard, so that whoever lived there could have adequate water. The community, in addition to this, and they did finally get a new water source, of course, but I also wanted to say we weren't immune to the social and economic changes around us. The KKK was active in most of Indiana in the 1920s, and so were people in Bloomington. It's estimated in 1924-25 that about 1,500 men, which is a fourth of the native-born white population, male, were members of the KKK. And I always hasten to point out that at this point, this is not like the 1860s Klan, which was basically anti-black. The KKK in the 1920s was against anybody who wasn't white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, to make it a short story. They were against the blacks, the Jews, the Catholics, the Eastern Europeans. Keep in mind, at this time in the 1920s, there were only about 500 black residents, 2% of the population in Monroe County, and a handful of Jewish families. And one of the Jewish merchants said he would see the parade going by, because they did have parade marches, and he could recognize his customers even though they were completely covered except for their feet. And he sold them their shoes. So he knew exactly who was willing to come in during the day and buy from him and then march at night. But I will say the Klan declined rapidly after the fall of D.C. Stevenson, their state leader, and that's a terrible, terrible story. The 1920s were filled with other activities as well, and there were fun things. So we do have a state marker involving Hoagie Carmichael, since he was born here, was raised here, went to school here, and is buried here. The marker is in front of the Gables restaurant on Indiana, and he's buried at Rose Hill. And many of you may have been there as well to visit. The Graham Plaza, or the Graham Hotel, opened in 1929. Think about it. What timing is that? To open a brand new hotel right before the crash for the Depression. Which leads me to poverty, which was a serious, serious problem in the city and the county. This is a part of what was called Pigeon Hill and is now called the Crossmont neighborhood on the northwest side of town. And I'll talk in a minute about the New Deal projects that helped. This is the Bloomington Day Nursery, started in 1939 by churchwomen of the community. And it has morphed over time into Monroe County United Ministries, and they've just changed their name now to Pathways, because they are focusing on the children that they serve and those children's families, and talking about pathways to success. A picture of the Salt Creek, the Deckard settlement, and the Bruner store. And they had gas and they had things in the store, but it wasn't the kind of stores we're quite used to these days. The Poor Farm is now Karst Farm Park. And the park was created, this was torn down, and the park was created in 1969 as the county's first park. It includes a greenway trailhead, a splash pad, athletic fields, shelters, a dog park, and lots of other amenities. And if you haven't been there, you do need to go out, and it's a beautiful park. And there are many others in city and county now. IU grew by 1900 to about those 600 students. And what I like to talk about is, in the first 60 years of the 20th century, IU was led by two remarkable men. The first was William Lowe Bryan, who was born in Monroe County and went to this one-room school at Phillips called Phillips Schoolhouse. And the second one, of course, was Herman B. Wells. They added departments and schools. They built a lot of new buildings. And things were going well until the Depression, of course. Wells connected to as many of the New Deal programs as the university could, and they built many buildings and infrastructure, especially using the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, and the Public Works Administration, the PWA, and many, many other projects. Here's just a couple. This was called the Administration Building in the beginning, and it's now called Bryan Hall, and the auditorium. The WPA also built a lot of walls and sidewalks all around town, and multiple goals here: to use local product and keep those people employed, and to build things and fix things that needed to be improved in the community, and to provide people with jobs. So the Rose Hill Cemetery, I wanted to just mention, because when they put this marker in 1936, one of the people who was on the crew was Norbert Peace. And he had said, now, we buried a time capsule here. So his family went to Parks Department this year and said, we're sure there's something in that limestone marker. So they opened it this year. His family had come from a number of different states to see what was in them. And I am so sorry to tell you that it was in a tin can which had rusted. And so we all peeked in and we could see there was this rusty tin can, but we didn't get to see anything else. But it brought that family together, and it brought this story back about these people worked together and they thought they had done something good for the future as well. It just didn't quite work out right. And then Banneker, that was constructed by the WPA, and they added on to the back of Banneker School, the auditorium, or the sports part of the Banneker building was added with New Deal money. Cascades Park was created in 1923, but they used New Deal money to build all of those wonderful shelters and parks, benches, and picnic tables. If you go through the park, you see all of that today. In the county and the surrounding area, much of the same. We also had Civilian Conservation Corps that had a camp in Monroe State Forest about 1933, composed of young men of color. And I really don't know very much about that one, but I thought, boy, that would be interesting to learn more about. And when the Steinsville School burned in 1935, the school got help from the WPA to build the new school, that is part of which is still in Steinsville. The Rural Electrification Act in 1936 started bringing electricity to the county, to the rural areas as well. And there were telephone wires some places. So things did improve in some ways. And Bloomington Speedway opened in 1923. The Ellettsville PTA and the Richland 4-H began what became the Fall Festival about 1935. So in 1940, thinking again about industry, RCA bought the old Showers building on South Rogers and began making radios. And I decided to notice that 1940 was when IU won its first NCAA basketball championship. And no, that's not a typo. We had lights on the courthouse lawn in the courthouse area in the 1930s. And in fact, when we started the Commission for Downtown back in the 1980s, someone came to the new director of that program and said, we used to have lights that ran from the courthouse to the edge of the square. And so thanks to May Cassidy and Cassidy Electric, they ran those again in the 1980s. But it came from this idea. And this is from the bicentennial calendar. I found this and I thought, that is perfect to tell that story. During World War II, I don't have a picture of the RCA women who made proximity fuses, since it was a top secret activity, and they didn't even tell the women what they were working on. But I wanted to mention that our RCA plant contributed that, as well as many other things, to the war effort. There's a history club program about that. Michael mentioned all those ones that are on YouTube, and I remember that one from a few years ago, and at the same time that the History Center had an exhibit. Crane, yes, I know it's not in Monroe County, but lots of people who live here work there, and this is one thing that is really a whole regional activity, so I wanted to mention it as well. World War II, there was lots of training for men and women at IU, fewer male students otherwise, but I wanted to focus on Lieutenant Gary Kisters, who was the first American to receive the Medal of Honor and the Distinguished Service Cross in World War II. He received them in 1944 for things he had done in 1943. Excuse me. When he was able to come home in 1944, after he had been to the White House to receive one of those awards from President Roosevelt himself, they had a parade in Bloomington and a number of other ways of honoring Gary Kisters. And I wanted to point out that there's an exhibit here in the back, in the front room, whichever room that is on the other side of the building, about Gary Kisters as well. And we did submit an application for a state historic marker, which was approved, and we'll get that erected sometime, we hope, in 2025. The city named the airport for Kisters, so when you think about, when you drive out there and it says Kisters Field, this is why, and they have an incredible exhibit about Lieutenant Kisters as well. And then the airport was transferred to the county control in 1960. There were, of course, like all over the country, there were lots more women working in factories. And so these women were working at Murray Glass. And there's the guy in his Navy uniform. After the war, RCA built radios and television sets and became the largest color television assembly plant in the world. And then it closed in 1998. Sarkis Tarzian, who worked at RCA, opened his own company in 1944, also working in the new electronics industry. IU grew exponentially after the war. IU had about 5,400 students in 1940. 5,400. By 1950, it had 18,000 students. The community just grew by leaps and bounds. There were GIs everywhere, and many of them were married and brought their families. So here you have the picture of Herman Wells greeting some of these new students, and the old Quonset hunts, some of which we still had just a few years ago, and the women meeting each other, and the various trailer parks around campus, trailer courts for married students. And that leads me to the History Center's exhibit on the post-World War IU trailer. So think of this, you're in the History Center right now, that hallway that goes from the Brown Gallery to the other gallery, that's how big the trailer was. And the bathroom was out the door and down the sidewalk or down the grass. But do come see that, because it really puts in perspective what they were willing to put up with, but the guys got to come to college, supported by the GI Bill, and their families were reunited after the war. One of the other special things after World War II was integrating basketball, and this is something that we also, in Bloomington and Monroe County, were involved in. Bill Garrett was the first black student in our, excuse me, in the Big Ten. And he was the only black student in those years that he played ball. There were no others on the IU team. There were no other black students on any of the teams he played against. But he was a success, and he just kept going. And that marker is over on campus. And then I thought, I can't talk for as long as I'm going to talk and not mention basketball in some other way as well. So I just wanted to mention that IU won the NCAA in 1940, 53, 76, 81, 87. And here is a wonderful postcard that reminds us of that. There were other companies then that we began to grow in other ways. Bloomington Advancement Corporation was created, and other supporters recruited new industries in the 50s and 60s. This is Westinghouse. There was Otis and Hot Point GE. And this one, as you notice, says Terhune and Westinghouse. This is part of the Herald Times photo collection that the History Center was able to receive when the Herald Times closed their business, building, and all of the things that had been saved there. So I wanted to give a shout out to them for that. Another new business in town, Bill Cook and his wife Gail moved to town and started a medical device company in their spare bedroom, and then grew and became a little bigger than that. So here's a little bigger than that. Other businesses closed. Showers, Seward, Tarzian. Limestone continued to decline. There's the cycle of business and industry in every community and every time, some on the up and some on the down. But some had special things in Bloomington. This is radio and TV. Tarzian helped create. WSUA became the first radio station in the county in 1946, and in 1949 we became the smallest city with its own television station, which was WTTV. Channel 10, and all of the folks who participated in that. Water, Lake Monroe was finally created in the 1950s. Here's a picture from the 60s, and of course, I hope you've seen that we're celebrating their 60th anniversary this year. So, and the DNR says it should be called Monroe Lake, not Lake Monroe. So Jill Vance is trying to recruit all of us to remember to say it the other way. Bloomington received the All-American City Award twice, once in 1958, partly because of the lake, Lemon, and again in 1982. And when Hillary and I found these photos, we decided we just had to show you. Here was the banquet, and here's the cake. Things changed about how we shopped as well. College Mall opened in 1965, affecting downtown and encouraging the East Side growth. Bloomington Economic Development Corporation was created to recruit new industries and help existing businesses. At the same time, the school corporations were beginning to consolidate because that was the new mantra of the way things should be done. So Richland Bean Blossom got the jump on us and created their own school corp for those 2 townships, and then the other 9 townships became the Monroe County Community School Corp. And we'll just I'll skip all the details about that. Never mind. There were culture clashes. I'm talking the 1960s. So here is the black market, which opened where People's Park now is. It opened in the summer of 1968 and was firebombed by someone who had connections to the KKK in December of 1968. And there was a historic marker dedicated there in 2020. I'm not really going to talk about other anti-war protests, but I've just always liked this picture, so I threw it in. And I like this woman. She's trying to put money in the parking meter and walk around all the people who are protesting on the courthouse lawn. I tried to think, where do we quit? At what point do I say it's not history, it's just recent events? But it seemed like the 1980s was still 40-some years ago now. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the courthouse renovation, the discussions, the fight over whether to save the courthouse or tear it down and build a brand new one someplace else. Obviously, you know that renovation won, and the courthouse was renovated. I want to talk about the importance of public-private partnerships. CFC saved the Grand Plaza Hotel and made it into the Grand Plaza, as long as they asked for the city to build a parking garage next door. And Mayor McCloskey and Bill Cook did that on a handshake, and then they did the legal papers. Then they said, well, we'll do the same with Fountain Square, if what is now Fountain Square on the south side. We'll renovate the south side if you build a parking garage. So we did, and they did, and we have that today. Now, I will say that both of those parking garages have had to be replaced since then, but they were there. Then there was the boom in the multi-story apartment buildings, which I didn't bring any slides of. You see those everywhere you go. But here's Fountain Square. And in its day in the 1980s, it was as good as any of the indoor malls in downtowns that I ever traveled to when I was the redevelopment director for the city. We did, they did, CFC did a really good job. The old library was saved, again, there was talk of tearing this down for a parking lot. A group called the Old Library, Inc. bought it, sold it eventually to the History Center, and then the History Center added on. The Convention Center took the old Tom O'Daniel building and made a convention center, and you all know that we're still in discussion and working on expanding that. Saving City Hall, or saving what was the old Showers building. A lot of those buildings were torn down, but what was left was eventually bought and made into City Hall. Again, a public-private partnership with the city, the county, and CFC. And it's changed a lot since '95 when they did that. It's been 30 years, but lots of things. This was the old City Hall when Linda Williamson and I worked in City Hall. That was it. And now it's the police station. And the economy moved on. RCA, Wetterau, Westinghouse, Otis, GE, all closed. Passenger train service ended. Some of those lines became rail trails, and new industries were brought. Baxter, Catalent, and so here's the major employers now. So you can see of over 1,000, there are 6 now. I want to talk briefly about Bloomington Hospital, and I thank Michael for this picture. He lived, whoops, wrong button. He lived right up there when he was growing up. Okay. So, and the hospital itself was here. Those two right there. The 1918 building and the 1940s core, what is now called the core building. So the hospital grew and grew and grew, as you know. The new hospital, they moved in 2021 and took a while to tear down all of the old things, but this is the new neighborhood that has been created. So I think I'll stop there and see if there are any questions or comments. I have lots of other things that I can talk about, but I've been here long enough. So thank you all, and there's still so much to talk about. Michael.
Concerning the historical marker, are we still trying to get the one for Gary Pfister located at the courthouse lawn? Is it still a fight for that?
I decided we just wouldn't talk about it until next year. So there's an election, as you might have noticed, in the next week or two. And we all had plenty of other things we were working on. Some of us really would like to have that marker at the courthouse lawn. The county says we have so many things on the courthouse lawn now that we'd really not like to put more things on the courthouse lawn. So that's the discussion. And the court and the county definitely approved having the marker at the airport. So it will be somewhere in the county. How's that for diplomacy? Any other questions? Ideas for other things that we should be thinking about getting markers for? And I did have a conclusion. I thought I couldn't think which thing do we want to end on, so I decided we'd just go into the future. And if you haven't seen Captain Janeway's statue on the Beeline Trail near Wonder Lab at 4th and the Beeline Trail, she'll be born here in 2336. So I did more than 200 years. That's 500.